Welcome to our Wednesday webinar extravaganza. We endeavor to have one on the last Wednesday of every month, and more on that a little bit later, but we're just grateful that you've joined us here today. If you, Sophie is on this call and she'll probably bug a couple of you if we don't have all your contact information so we can keep you up to date with all things Implementa. Special thanks to Tyndale University, who is sponsoring this webinar today. Appreciate Tyndale, more from them in a moment. My name is Joey Malloy, and I'm the Executive Ministry Director here at Implementa. I'll share more about what Implementa is for those of you who don't know. I know some of you know too well, and you hear this little preamble every month, so thanks for being patient as we talk about that some more. And yeah, so as we think about today's topic, we're just really blessed to have Jason Persaud with us here from the Culture Changers, and just talking and hoping it'll be a good conversation as well as we move forward, just on the whole area of how to grow youth ministry, reaching other cultures. And we're just at a really neat time and space, I think, in our country, where cultures have come from really all over the world. And I think a wonderful challenge we have is to how to make an impact for the kingdom on that. So we'll look forward to what Jason has to say in a moment. And Jason, great to have you with us. So Tyndale University, like I said, is sponsoring today. Thank you to Tyndale. I'm going to show you a little 1-minute video of theirs, and encourage you to make yourself aware of their ministry, of their school, maybe for yourself or perhaps for students that you have considering Christian education. So let's watch this video together. There you go. Again, thank you to Tyndale for sponsoring us today. Okay, Jason, I'm going to turn things over to you now, and I'm going to unshare my screen so you can jump in and share yours. And we look forward to what you have to say to us today. Thanks for being here, Jason.
Thanks, Joey. Really appreciate it. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. Great to see everybody. Thanks for joining us. Ian, great to see you, friend. And hey, Kelly, how are you? And Alan, Matt from Scotland. I love it, Matt. Thanks so much. And Jen. And I think someone else is joining us in there as well. So today's topic is something that I'm very passionate about. And just to give you a little bit of background about me, I'm also a pastor in Brampton, Ontario here, which is just north of the Pearson International Airport. We have just over 700,000 people in our city. And Brampton is one of the most culturally diverse cities in the entire world and in our country, North America as well. Visible minority is close to 80%. And I'm biracial. My mom is German, blonde-haired, green-eyed German, and I am Guyanese and from Guyana, South America. Guyana, even though it's at the northern part of South America, it identifies more with the West Indies than it does with Chile or Venezuela or other parts of um, South America, but a lot of great cultural things. And I'm born and raised here in the Toronto area as well. My wife is from New Brunswick, which is a whole nother culture from Toronto. I learned that when I moved there. And so a little bit about me, I got 2 kids. And if I could maybe just do a little shameless plug here, so you guys know where my heart is today on this. I'm very passionate about this. I'm just going to spotlight myself here so I can share my screen with you. I don't know if this is the right way to do it, but I was so passionate about this about 2 years ago when George Floyd was murdered. I really felt it was important for us to really address issues in our culture. And when I began to ask around and call different organizations and speak with leaders across the country, I realized that we were really missing a segment of addressing cultural issues that were very important, especially in large urban centers. Issues of race are huge issues in large urban centers like Toronto and Montreal specifically. I know Calgary. I'm not sure about Vancouver, other places, but we've seen such a cultural shift over the last 2 years. But more than that, we've seen a tremendous amount of immigration and people from different cultures coming and moving to Canada. My parents both were immigrants back in the 60s. And so I'm born and raised here. And I grew up in a very multi-ethnic family, lived in multi-ethnic communities, went to church in multi-ethnic communities, and I've pastored multi-ethnic congregations. As a youth, young adult pastor, I'm an associate pastor now. And changers, which I'll just show you the website quickly, was George Floyd. But more than that, it really was a journey about 20 years ago. I came on staff to a church here in the Brampton area, and the pastor who was leading it, a white guy, if I could just be blunt, was very passionate about how do we really become culturally sensitive and culturally aware to the community that's developing around us, and how do we reach them? And so he started this journey with our staff 20 years ago on a document called Cultural Sensitivity. And I really honor with him. I really believe he was pioneering something and missed an opportunity to publish a book that we were putting together. I think as a team, we did a bunch of research to bring this document together, and he never published it. But this was really reinvigorated back in me to deal with this issue back in 2020, when I went back to school. After 25 years of being out of school, I went back to get my master's in practical theology and leadership. And I've had a number of courses on this issue. And so for me, it made me aware that as the church, how do we adjust? Oh, I'm not sharing my screen yet. Thanks, Joy. Let me just go here and share it. Can you guys see that now? That's good. It made me realize that as a church, we have got to really address issues in culture. So I started in 2020 on Instagram, the Culture Changers, creating conversation space for young adults and youth to talk about issues that matter to them. So I initially launched it talking about issues on racial injustice. It's one of our core series, but the real heart of the ministry is to equip the church to be a leading voice in culture to impact the world. And I really believe the church is obligated and mandated scripturally to speak up and to speak out. Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 and 9 tells us that we need to speak out against injustice and we need to speak up. And if the church isn't doing it, then who's going to do it? And I really believe the church is well equipped to do this. I believe Jesus led by example and how to deal with cultural issues. And I believe the Apostle Paul modeled that, be able to cross cultures and to be able to be well equipped to embrace people. So just to give you a quick overview of the website here, and I'm not sure why it's not showing my pictures, but anyways, that's weird. Churches and organizations, we do consulting and training, obviously preaching and teaching, and then a bunch of next gen stuff as well. So would encourage you to maybe check out the website and see what we do. Our big thing is our Instagram live series. And I'm just going to go to that. And I'm just wrapping up tomorrow night in a series called Racial Injustice Culture in the Church, taking a little bit of a pulse check of where we're at 2 years later on this issue. How well have we done? In April, I did a series called Courageous Women in Culture, talking about stories of courageous women sharing their story of abuse in relationships that they've endured in the church. And I don't think we do enough about talking about those issues in the church and creating a space for young adults to talk about that. So I just would encourage you to check that out, and would really appreciate that. But today, I see another Jason Persaud here. I know that that is not my twin, my evil twin. It could be my evil twin, or it could just be our evil student ministries director, Victor Malbarosa, here at our church. He's not evil. He's okay. Well, today we're here to talk about expanding your youth ministry and reaching other cultures. So I want to share a story with you. What we did here in Brampton. I had the privilege when I was with Youth for Christ to oversee Brampton in developing programs and start a youth network out here. And one of the things that we realized about 3.5, 4 years in to our youth network here was that all of our youth ministries were quite stagnant across our city. And so when a bunch of our youth pastors sat down, and we had a good probably 30 that we pulled in our city. We had about 40 churches that were part of our youth, what we call the Brampton Youth Network here. But we had a good core of about 25 to 30 churches that were really involved. And we were scratching our heads, and we were trying every evangelistic tool, program, idea to become more missional. And no matter what we did, it felt like our youth ministries across the board were not growing in our city. And back in 2017 or late 2017, 2018, Alpha announced that they were coming out with a new youth curriculum that we thought would be great to see if we could use that as a catalyst to revitalize evangelism and helping our youth ministries grow in our city. And so 10 of the largest churches in our city decided, now catch this out, decided in September, the start of the year, that we would scrap our normal youth programs that we have done historically for years. And we would simultaneously run Youth Alpha in our churches with the goal of equipping and training our students on how to be better grounded in what they believed, but as well to inspire them to see if we could mobilize multiple teams of students in our city, in their high schools. Because one of the biggest barriers that we experienced was that our students were inviting their friends to church from other cultures. But Brampton is a highly religious city as well. A lot of Sikh, Muslim, and Hindu community, Jainism as well. Sprinkled in with a lot of agnostics and atheists as well. And, and instead of putting more pressure on our students to reach your friends, reach your friends, reach your friends, we need to grow our youth ministry. And I'm not saying those are all the words that we used, but I think that's what they heard. And so sometimes we put a great pressure on our students without really giving them the tools to reach their friends. And what we realized is it wasn't a lack of desire to evangelize and share the gospel with their friends. Their friends simply weren't allowed to come to our church or our churches. Their parents would not allow them. So we had to figure out a different strategy of how we could equip and mobilize our students where their friends were. And we felt Alpha was the greatest tool and solution for what we did. So what we did was we journeyed for the 11 weeks with the Alpha through the fall. And then at the start of the year, in January of 2018, we held an Alpha rally in our city with all the churches that were involved, and we opened it up to others as well. Our combined churches, we had just over 200, 250 young people come. And then we brought in, check this out, one of my good friends, his name is David Patterson. He's a Catholic chaplain in our city who loves Alpha and has been running it in the Catholic school for years and gets 50, 60 kids out from all different faiths, and just unbelievable job. And we had him come in and share what God was doing in his high school And he brought a whole team of young people from all different faiths that were journeying with Alpha in their school. And not all of them were Christians, but most of them were leaders helping lead Alpha in their school. I'm talking about Muslims and Sikhs and Hindus and others. It was just unbelievable. And they shared their story of how the gospel made sense to them. And some were a little bit further along in their journey when it came to their gospel journey. And some had made firm commitments in receiving Jesus as their Lord and Savior, but couldn't tell their families. And so for them, having Alpha, and I'm not trying to promote Alpha here because, I work for Alpha, as I don't, but I'm a huge Alpha fan, just so you know. I believe it's a great tool. It's not the only tool, but it was a tool that worked for us. And out of that, we were able to mobilize multiple teams of students from different youth ministries working together to reach students in their high schools. And we had alphas as small as 5 and as large as 50. And so we just saw God do tremendous things. And then we held an Alpha celebration rally here that we hosted at my church. And we had about 70. We were reaching over 300 in the high schools. And we had about 70 students show up. And what they told their parents was that they were going to a party, which it was. It was an Alpha celebration party. That's what Alpha does at the end. So they told their parents they were coming to a party, and we allowed students to share their stories of how Jesus impacted their lives. And I can tell you stories from agnostics and atheists and Muslims and Hindus and how Jesus was bringing them on this journey as they were exploring the Christian faith. So a little bit of a story of how we approach that here. And as a result of that, within a 2-year period, a 1.5 year period, we began to see students catch it in our church, reaching their friends in their high schools, and our youth ministry alone grew 30% literally in a 1.5 months. So I say that to say this. Some of the things I'm going to share with you today are not instant. Your youth ministry is going to grow overnight. It is not going to happen, but we need to be faithful to plow, to plant, to plant seeds, to water, to cultivate a missional culture and an invitational culture in our youth ministries. And so for us here at our church, we were able to cultivate a missional and an invitational culture all at once. And Alpha was the tool that we used. So that's a little bit about my story of how God has began to transform our youth ministry just prior to the pandemic. Actually, it was January of 2020, yeah, that we saw this growth in a short period of time. But more than that, what was more exciting than the growth, it was the amount of students sharing their faith unashamed in their high schools, at their workplaces, and in their neighborhoods. So today, I want to talk to you a little bit about what we need to do. And I share with you a little bit about the culture changers, about equipping the church to be a leading voice in culture. And one of the things that has surprised me, especially over the last year, and has been the questions that pastors and leaders have asked is, how do we do this? And so just so you know, I actually just launched the website last month. Just last month. I launched it a year early because of the need, because I'm still in school and in ministry and do a couple other things on the side. I was going to wait till I was done school, but because of need, I launched it. But I want to talk to you about some things today that I think that are absolutely crucial for us as leaders to know. And I'm going to share my screen here again, and I want to walk you through a PowerPoint that I've presented. There's only 4 slides, and I'm trying to make this as simple as possible for us today. And then obviously we're going to have some conversations. I want to talk to you about intercultural competence. And it's amazing of the unconscious bias that all of us have in our lives. And let me just say this. I believe that the disciples in the Bible operated with unconscious bias. Actually, let me just stop sharing for just a moment because I want to just grab your attention. I believe scripture teaches us that all of us have unconscious bias, whether we know it or not. Can I share a quick story about me personally? My very first youth pastor position was at a Korean church. And I went into this Korean church, growing up in a very multi-ethnic church and in community with many Asian friends from different, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean backgrounds. And I went in And I went in with this perception that all of my students, and I'm saying this was an unconscious bias that I'm confessing. So this was back in 1999, 97, maybe 1997, before some of you were born, maybe. I went in and I had this assumption that all my students were good at math because they were Asian. To realize that half of my students sucked at math. And I had this unconscious bias because of some of the environments and things that I was exposed to, that it was prejudice and it was an unconscious bias. And all of us have that. And I believe scripture teaches us that. Let me just walk you through very quickly before we talk about intercultural competence. Let's talk about Peter. Peter walked with Jesus for 3 years. Peter was one of the main disciples. And what do we see in Acts chapter 2? We see Acts chapter 2, Peter gets up on the day of Pentecost and preaches where everyone is gathered on Pentecost from the entire Roman Empire and beyond. We know that even it expanded out into Egypt at that time in Alexandria. So here Peter is talking to a very multi-ethnic, culturally diverse crowd, Jewish in nature, Greek in culture, because we know Alexander the Great conquered that part of the world, but Greek influence was huge back in that day. Language, culture, customs, multiple gods that even Jews served and worshiped and even tolerated wherever they lived. And here's Peter getting up. We see phenomenal things happen through the early church. Fast forward to Acts chapter 6. What happens in Acts chapter 6? In the New Living Translation, it says that there was a great discrimination between the Hebrew-speaking widows and the Greek-speaking Hellenist widows. Over what? The distribution of food? I don't believe it was just the distribution of food. I've looked in tons of commentaries and theological books, and depending what you read, will say it was over the distribution of food. I don't believe that. There are other, let me say this. In your library, how many authors do you have that are non-white? When I went to Bible school, all the authors that we read and studied, and even now in my current master's program, are primarily Caucasian American authors. So when I began to expand outside of my normal influence of where I was getting my theological training and look into other cultures and theological writings, I realized that we had missed something very key. In Acts chapter 6, which happened 3 to 5 years, they estimate, after Pentecost, so maybe around 35 to 38 AD, we see this great discrimination happen. What was the issue? The issue was favoritism. The issue was discrimination. The issue that the apostles were causing was that they were giving preferred treatment to widows that were Hebrew speaking. And so what did they do? They installed 7 deacons that were all from Greek-speaking backgrounds. And we don't have a lot of information theologically on them, but we do know that that division was so great, they put Greek-speaking Jews in charge. That was the issue. Fast forward to Acts chapter 10, Peter and Cornelius, which was about another 10 years. Was it 10 years? Maybe 5 to 10 years after Acts chapter 6. And what happens? Peter is on top of a roof, and he gets this vision of a white sheet coming down with 4-footed animals, reptiles, and all these things. And what does God say to him 3 times? Peter, get up and eat. And what is Peter's response? I've never eaten anything unclean. And so here we have Peter in the mix of walking with Jesus for 3 years. Acts chapter 2, the day of Pentecost. Acts chapter 6, this discrimination between widows, the Greek speaking and Hebrew speaking. And now we're in Acts chapter 10, and we have this 10 to 15 year period that God is trying to get a hold of Peter's heart, because he has unconscious bias towards others, and especially Gentiles. And I don't have time to get into that passage. And then we fast forward to Acts chapter 15 and the Council of Jerusalem. And that really was a result of Galatians chapter 2. Peter was hanging out with Paul in Galatians chapter 2. Peter was hanging out with a bunch of Gentiles and eating with them, and some leaders came from Jerusalem. And what did Peter do? Peter backed off and began to remove himself, and Paul called him out for his hypocrisy. And so Acts chapter 2 correlates, or Acts chapter 15 correlates with Galatians chapter 2, where they needed to figure out what are they going to do with all these Gentiles that are getting saved, and what restrictions do they need to follow. So we look at scripture and we see that it is possible as a Christian, as a believer and follower of Jesus, to have unconscious bias in our hearts. And I believe as the church, we function in a lot of that, but we're unwilling to admit it. All of us. Let's just be honest. And it doesn't pop up until we get in these situations. And I know I still have unconscious bias because we're not experts in every other culture. But this is why this is important for us to have intercultural competence. Intercultural competence is a skill. It's a skill that we learn by listening, critical thinking, analyzing, and observing. I think one of the greatest disservices that we do in leading our young people sometimes is being misinformed. I believe that as I'm no longer the youth pastor here at our church, I am still in charge of young adults, but we have to become learners. And learning is not, and I know some people hate reading, so it's not all about having to read a book, but there's great articles that are there. There are great podcasts. There are great YouTube. There are great speakers that are beginning to really deal with this. But more importantly, I believe one of the greatest skills that we learn is by listening to others that are in our sphere, listening to the young people from different cultures in our church and families, learning from our neighbors in the neighborhoods that we live in on what they experience, maybe even going to the school board and sitting with them. I have the privilege of being an advisor to the superintendent of anti-Black racism, oppression, the title's very, very long, Indigenous education, here for our Peel District School Board. And I've been able to educate them on Christianity, that we're not a hate faith, that, we are inclusive. And just because we might define inclusivity a little bit different, doesn't mean that we don't embrace and love people for who they are. And so we need to listen to people. One of the things when George Floyd was murdered, one of the things that I did as a non-Black pastor is I reached out to some of my Black family members. My sister-in-law is Black, and reached out to some pastor friends, but I sat with a number of our students and their families to listen what they were feeling, what they were experiencing, so I could learn and understand better. And so this isn't about politics. It's not about social reform. It's listening to how people are really walking through the different challenges of faith, and even outside in our community, even learning about them. And let me give you an example of just a story. I had a couple Muslim youth leaders call me at the church here back in 2019. And they wanted to stop by the church to see me. And I got to be honest with you. Initially, I was like, I wasn't interested. I was already busy enough at my schedule. And I thought to myself, I already know things about Islam and I'm not sure. Well, they unexpectedly showed up on a Sunday here to come to one of our worship services. They came towards the end just to see how we do worship. And then I had a phenomenal conversation with them. And I've become very good friends with one of the Muslim leaders in our Ahmadiyya mosque here in our city. And him and I have sat down over coffee and done Zoom calls and WhatsApp video calls and just talked about what we're experiencing in our own context in the mosque and in the church with our young people. And I've learned quite a bit more on what they believe and even how to become more missional in reaching them. And as well, I had actually planned, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second here. Just prior to the pandemic, we were organizing for them to bring their entire youth group to our church on a Friday night to experience how we do our youth service. Wouldn't that have been the coolest thing? A bunch of Muslim young people coming to our church and experiencing, games. I'm sure they do games and worship and preaching, and our dynamic of how we do that. And we were planning to go to their church or their youth ministry on a Friday night so that our students could learn more about their faith. And I think sometimes we're scared that our young people will learn and leave. I think our young people need to learn and we need to walk them through and help them navigate different faiths and to become more competent in understanding their friends so that they could reach their friends better. I'm going to go back and share here. All right. So we need to develop skills. And I love this model here that I got. I love charts, just so you know, you're going to know that. Attitudes. We need to change our attitudes towards people. We need to be open. We need to learn to discover. We need to respect what and how people believe. This past Sunday, I had the privilege of officiating a wedding for one of our young adults. He's marginal in his faith and decided to marry a Hindu girl. And so I did all their pre-marriage, and she was open to pre-marriage, but yet they were toggling between pre-marriage and getting married by me and doing things in the Hindu temple. And I, through relationship, I just had some very good and honest and transparent conversations with them. But I wanted to be open as well. I also come from a Hindu background, with my dad being born and raised in Guyana. But I didn't come in with the attitude, I'm going to convert her, or you have to be at my church or convert to Christianity by the end of the 5 weeks that we're done our pre-marriage. My attitude is, how do I reach her? How do I share the gospel through this? How do I, reach her with love? How do I express love? How do I, bring her along this journey of discovery of who Jesus is and how amazing having a personal relationship with him is? How do I make her curious? And I think these are the kinds of questions that we need to ask ourselves. How do we equip our students to be more open to other, to learn about other people's customs and practices and belief systems? And I know that, youth ministry, young people are at a very fragile stage when it comes to spiritual formation and faith formation. And this is why us as leaders, we need to be able to be equipped to answer these questions and do series, whether they're a month series or 2-month series or even quarterly things where we help them navigate apologetics and other faiths or world religions, whatever it is. But more importantly, we need to help them have a better grounding of who Jesus is and why we believe what we believe. So how do we make others curious about what we believe? And then we need to look at the culture side as well. We need to understand that when a Sikh person accepts Jesus, it doesn't mean that you have to take your turban off or change your clothing or change your rings, or you can no longer do henna. I'm not sure if you know what henna is. It's a very, very beautiful kind of artistry that they do on their hands and on their arms. And it's just beautiful on, how they do that. How do we help people still remain culture, within their culture, but help them journey along their belief systems and their values? And so what I've discovered is we've led many young people, and I've had people convert to Christianity in our church because of our dynamic. We've discovered many people have a mixture in the beginning of their culture and what they've believed through their different religions, and knowing that Jesus has changed their life. And so, what I've discovered in the beginning, we would tell people, no, you can't do this and you can't do that, and we were driving people away than allowing the Holy Spirit to really work in their lives. And so we have to journey with people. And I don't think a 4-week discipleship class is the answer, or getting them to this leadership pipeline or this intake program is the answer. We need to walk with people. We need to journey with people, even in our youth ministries as well. We need to really do a better job in developing small group leaders and leaders to really help journey with our students so that they can ask the difficult questions that really are bothering them as they navigate faith and as they navigate even reaching their friends. But as well, we need to have competence in communicating as well. And a little hard for me to see here, but I'm just going to see if I could just stop sharing for a moment so I could read this definition for you. So the definition of intercultural competence is this: intercultural competence is the ability to function effectively across cultures, to think and act appropriately, and to communicate and work with people from different cultural backgrounds. And I really believe that this model here sort of helps lay out a little bit of a guideline and maybe even a little bit of a roadmap for us to follow so that we could be better, more competent. So why is this important for us to have intercultural competence? It's important because it affects how we live missionally. And I'm just going to go to the next slide here. Give me a second. I just finished reading a book called The Missional Leader. And so this is out of the book that I have read, and I really love this book. It's very current. It was written in 2020 by the authors that you can see there. I would encourage you to read this. It's great overall if we really if the church and our youth ministries really want to become more missional in what we do. And so we need to have 5 components in order to really reach other cultures. We need to have awareness, understanding, we need to evaluate, experiment, and we need to have commitment. I'm going to just touch on those quickly here, and then I'm going to open things up. So I'm going to be maybe just another, I hope this is okay, Joey, 5 minutes, if that's okay. And then we can take some questions and comments. Is that okay, Joey? Another 5 minutes? Great. So let me just go to the next slide here. So just so you know, all of us are trying to figure out ways to become more missional in our own personal lives and in our ministries. And I believe that this is a long-term journey. It is not an overnight change. And so when we think about growing and revitalizing our youth ministries, we need to do it one student at a time. I know what it's like to build a youth ministry from a handful of kids, 8 kids, to over 100 in a 2.5-year period. Now, by using Hemorrhaging Faith as a great guide, if you've not used Hemorrhaging Faith or Renegotiating Faith in your youth/young adult ministry, I would encourage you to use both of those research documents and flush out what works in your context. And we were able to work that out in our context and see God do some really great things. But here's the problem. You can have growth and not be missional. Because let's be honest, the majority of our churches are very inward focused, and we cater to really taking care of our people rather than equipping them to become missional. And so I just want to share this. As you know, the path to change is not a straight road. See that dotted line? That's what I hope ministry could be like. And I wish they would teach us this in Bible school, but they're not teaching us in our Bible schools, really. But it is the path to change is a bunch of steps and is a jagged road. And it is not straight. The path to change, and it is difficult. And I want to encourage you for whatever stage you are or role or position that you are in your church, be in it for the long haul. Don't give up. Plowing is not easy. Change is not easy, but missional living is something that we model and we do. So, in order for us to be more intercultural competent, we need to be aware. We need to listen. We need to have, an awareness. Awareness reveals unexpected ways of addressing problems. So one of the first things that I would encourage you to do, if you don't already in your own life, begin to listen to family members or friends or neighbors or people in your community that are from different faith groups, and listen to them about why they believe what they believe and what is important to them. Ask them questions of, what do they think about Christianity? What has been their experience dealing with Christians or with the church? It will be amazing what kind of answers that you will get for that. And so listening helps us to become more aware. I would encourage you, if there is something happening in your community where you could even sit down with other faith leaders in your community, do that. I have the privilege of sitting on a faith committee for our school board here, where 50 faith leaders from various faith groups meet once a quarter with the director of education and a number of superintendents over issues in the school board. We talk about faiths, we talk about what's important to us. And I have learned so much sitting in that room, just listening to the Zionist or the Sikh leader or people from other faiths. And it's helped me develop strategy. It actually helped me develop strategy while I was with Youth for Christ on how to reach our city better, and actually how to share vision with other pastors in our city of the importance of working together. Catch that? Number 2, we need to have better understanding. Understanding begins to deepen our appreciation for what is actually being said and experienced. Let's not write people off. Let's not write other faith groups off. We know that Jews, Judaism, and Muslims are the two faith groups that we have the same forefather, Abraham. If Jesus is a point of contention, roll it all the way back to Abraham and have conversations of why Abraham and Ishmael and a little bit of their history is important. Back in 2020, during the summer of the first year of the pandemic, I got a call from my friend Nuruddin, who called me and said, "Hey, Jason, we're doing this big online global thing to help bring a better awareness of what Ahmadiyya Muslims believe versus regular Muslims, because regular Muslims don't believe that Ahmadiyya Muslims are real Muslims, because they don't believe that Muhammad was the last prophet. They have other prophets that have come through after Muhammad. So the traditional Muslims really cast them off. And so he invited me to this big viewing they were doing globally. And I learned so much. They did such a tremendous job. And so it opened even more doors for me to have conversations with him and his leaders and just about faith. And so he asked me, "Jason, talk to me about Christianity, why you believe Jesus is the savior of the world." Can you imagine having conversations with Muslims around this? Joey, I would really encourage you, if you ever do a follow-up on Muslims, my friend Greg Armstrong in Mississauga City Baptist, actually does this and has conversations. He has targeted the Muslim community to learn, and they have learning conversation sessions, doing a phenomenal job. But anyways, we need to evaluate, where we are in our youth ministries. Are we really equipping our students to be missional? Is currently what we're doing in our youth ministry, and please don't misunderstand me when I say this. I get it. We're just reopening after COVID. I know youth ministries that are just restarting in person after 2 years, and you're trying to figure out as a youth leader or a pastor, how do I care? How do I deal with the mental health issues, the disconnect, and all those things? I get it, but we need to evaluate, how do we toggle both to become missional? And I want to encourage you, experiment as well. Experiment. What are some things that you can do to bring in a speaker, to bring in Alpha, to use Alpha or Sun Life or other kinds of curriculums to help disciple and help students live missional lives? Experiment with different outreaches and visiting others, groups, visiting schools or visiting a mission or helping Syrian refugees or other refugees in your communities, and just listening to what they've experienced, and be committed and know that missional innovation takes a lot of time. So I'm going to end it there and open up for questions, because I'm already over. I said 5 minutes and I was 8. So I'm sorry. So I just wanted to present intercultural competence, what's important. And I'm happy to share this with you as well and send it to Joey, and he can send it out to everyone else. But
Yeah,
5 key things that we need for missional change model.
awesome. Wow, Jason, thank you. I learned a lot. I suspect everyone else did as well, and very much appreciated. We got a couple questions coming in. Feel free to just keep popping those in the chat box. And I just wanted to share a couple little things with you before we get to those questions. So again, thank you, Jason, for being willing to engage other cultures strategically and with a heart. That's probably something I picked up on as I was listening to you today. Okay, so as some of you know, Implementa is really all about joining youth workers in the trenches and doing our best to equip you through consulting, coaching, and training. We have online courses that we run. Our main program is a 2-year program, and you see the 4 courses that we have that are online: philosophy of youth ministry, building a team, practical application, spiritual formation, and they happen twice a year. And so those are our online courses. Our on-site courses actually happen in the summertime, which I wanted to highlight for you today. There are 2 intensives. One is calendaring, and one is preaching and teaching to students. And those happen at the camp that I also work at, Camp Carith. And they're 1-day intensives that you're welcome to take part in as well. July 9th is our calendaring one. And essentially what we're going to learn is the principles required to actually put together a ministry calendar. And I guarantee you that you will have your calendar for the 22-23 ministry year put together when you leave that day. So feel free to check that out. We'd love to have you join us for that. Just a quick quick plug at camp. I'm finding there's a lot of places, camps, ministries. We're having a hard time hiring people. So if anybody knows anyone kind of, older than 15, young adult lifeguards would be awesome. If you could just let us know and connect them to me through this or through Camp Carith, that would be great. On August 12 to 14, we'd love to have you and your youth leadership team join us for prep, praying, relating, equipping, planning. This is a weekend where you bring your leadership team to camp, and we'll have some plenary sessions with my friend Paul Racine, and Josiah Milnes will be there leading worship. And we'd love to have you come. So we provide these sessions, but we also provide lots of time and space for you to actually plan out your year with your group. So if you came to the calendaring course, and you'd have your year planned out, and you'd be able to excitedly share that with your leadership team. So keep that in mind as well, different opportunities this summer. And then, of course, on August 20th is our preaching and teaching to students, where we look at not so much the exegesis or the hermeneutics behind it. That's way more than a one-day course, of course, but looking more at how do you communicate to students, how to tell a good story and how it fits in, how to keep junior high students' attention, how to put together a preaching series, a retreat series, a preaching calendar as well, and those types of issues. So we'd love to have you for either of those. And again, all the information you can get. In October, just real quickly, our Building a Team course will start up. And that's a course committed to helping you recruit, train, and inspire your youth leaders to further reach the students that God has for you. And our spiritual formation course will be happening at the same time with my friend Paul Racine, who has spent 40 years coaching and loving on youth ministry workers here in the Ottawa area. And I'm thrilled that he's able to teach that course for us again this fall. Okay, next month is our Wednesday webinar extravaganza, and I actually will be hosting this one. And we're going to be looking at answered prayer. As some of you remember, we had an answered prayer little tour in the spring where we went around to different youth ministries, saw what was going on, what are some of the challenges, where are we growing, different things like that. And we're going to be talking about what we learned through answered prayer and where we're going. And we're hoping to have some exciting news to announce at that webinar. So go ahead and just lock in the last Wednesday. Most of your calendars will give you the option of last Wednesday of the month, 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And we'd love to have you join us for our webinars.